welcome to the second edition of our DVA speaker series. I would like to invite Bob Isaacson and Greg Schmidt on a conversation about the brand new frequently asked questions that we've been releasing on social media. And without further ado, Bob Isaacson.
Hi, everyone. I could say good morning, but I know it's not morning in a lot of places that are listening to us. So right now it's a little bit after 9 a.m. Thank you, Charles. In California, I'm in San Diego, California. I'm the president and co-founder of Dharma Voices for Animals. We call ourselves DVA, and this actually is the 10th year we've been around. Just started the 10th year a little while ago. So we're the only international Buddhist animal rights, animal advocacy organization in the entire world. We're the only one. And this is really exciting for me to see how we've grown from when we first started out to where we are now. So we're all over the US and Europe, and we also have major countrywide projects in 3 countries, which I'll tell you about in just a minute. We have chapters around the world, including chapters in the US, Europe, South America, and Asia, of course. Most Buddhists in the world live in Asia, over 98% of the Buddhists worldwide. So in the US, I want to give you a few updates. This is our second speakers program in our series. We hope to offer this on a regular basis. And this is number 2, and I'm going to be welcoming our guest speaker in just a minute after I give you a little bit of information updates on DVA. Thank you all for joining, whether you're a DVA member or not. You know, if you're not a member, you want to get our newsletter and keep up with our speakers program and all the events and all the updates, what's going on, a lot of exciting things going on around the world. Just go to our website and sign up. Go to become a member, and that's how you do it. It's very simple. So we in the US are with a lot of the top teachers, a lot of the top Dharma teachers, monastics and lay teachers. And what we're trying to do is connect with Buddhist centers around the United States. There's a lot of them. And we want to start conversations. And we have conversations going with a lot of these centers to try to encourage them to serve more compassionate diets, to move from what they're serving now, what they're eating at the retreat center, to a diet, first vegetarian diet, better yet, vegan diet. All of our leadership is vegan in DVA. And so we're doing that. We also have an interesting program, which we're not ready to start yet, with coronavirus, COVID-19 concerns. And that would be, we're going to have a mobile home and working with the volunteer who's going to be going around the United States to talk to different centers about their food policy. Try to start a conversation to encourage policies that save the lives of as many animals as possible. This is what we're doing. We can't do it without your help. So thank you all for being on the call. Thank you all for being DVA members and volunteers and donors and everything. We couldn't possibly do this without you. So I mentioned we would, or I would give you an update on our projects. So we have 3 projects going, one in Sri Lanka. It's our oldest project since 2017. And we are back up and running now after taking several months off because of course, concerns about the pandemic. And now it's much easier. The pandemic is under control in the country. We're starting slowly to make presentations. And I could report to you that earlier today, so this would be on Sunday afternoon in Sri Lanka, well, we had several presentations, one of them to 75 people at a Dhamma temple. So in Thailand, very exciting. We just started that project in March. And already our director Banks is giving presentations about the benefit of a plant-based diet to monastics in the country of Thailand. The country of Thailand has 65 million Buddhists, 65 million, population of 70 million. and 300,000 monastics. Monastics are welcoming us into their temples or their wats, and we are making presentation about the reasons, all of the reasons, environmental, compassion, and health, why Buddha should be vegetarian, should be vegan actually, and vegetarian is the first step. So that is an update. In Vietnam, exciting things going on as well. We're getting about 1,000 people at our presentations, but those presentations actually have stopped because of the pandemic. We expect to be able to start those fairly soon in the country of Vietnam. And one more thing I wanted to mention, and that is 2 weeks from today, not 2 weeks from today, 2 weeks from yesterday on August 29, Saturday, we have another exciting program for you. Tanisara, who was a Buddhist nun for a number of years. She was a nun in the Ajahn Chah tradition and is a beloved teacher in the US now, and is on the teaching council and the inner circle of teachers at some of the top retreat centers, Buddhist retreat centers in the US. And she's going to be joining me talking about many things, including her veganism, how important it is for Buddhists to observe compassionate diet and to practice that way, which is of course what we encourage everyone to do wherever they are, to start on the path towards a compassionate diet. And Tanisara also is a social activist. She lived a number of years with her husband Kittisaro in South Africa and was a social activist in that country, and has sanghas that are still continuing after she's come back to live in the West. So I hope you're going to join us on August 29. That's Saturday, August 29, also at the same time. And so without further ado, I want to introduce our speaker, Greg Schmidt. Greg has been working as a volunteer behind the scenes with us for 3 years now. And so Greg, I'm really happy as a chance now to share his knowledge and wisdom and compassion about Buddhism. Greg has a master's degree in Buddhist studies from the International Buddhist College in Thailand, really well-respected Buddhist learning center, and has been practicing Buddhism and meditation for many, many years, and has been an enormous support to us. And Greg can tell you some of the projects he's working on, and he and I will have a conversation about whether Buddha should be vegetarian or vegan. So, hey, welcome, Greg.
Hey, Bob, thanks. Good morning. It's 11 o'clock here in Dallas, so it's still morning.
Yeah, it's still morning. So 11 o'clock in Dallas, it's 12 in New York City. It's it's 9:30 or actually 9:40 in Sri Lanka, and 11:30 in Thailand and Vietnam at night. So people are staying up really late at night to listen to us. So what I thought I would do is just start out with asking you just a little bit about what your plans are and what we've been working on in terms of the FAQs, posting on social media with Charles's help, and then we'll get into the questions that everyone wants to know. Should Buddhists be vegetarian, etc.? Yeah,
absolutely. One of my favorite topics. So you mentioned a little bit earlier this idea of starting conversations in temples in Southeast Asia, this RV that's going to kind of drive the country, starting conversations. And for me, the starting conversations piece, or where I come in, is really on social media. And so this whole conversation about what we're doing today and what our roadmap is really kind of starts there. As a participant in, I don't know, some 20 plus different Facebook groups, some of which are vegan, most of which are not. There's a lot of questions that just come up over and over and over. Questions like, should Buddhists be vegetarian? Should Buddhists be vegan? Well, what did the Buddha teach on this subject? And as I continue to encounter these same questions over and over, just started to document kind of my standard answers. What does the Pali Canon say? What does the Mahayana Canon say? What do respected Buddhist teachers say on the subject? and then now working with Charles, who's so graciously hosting this call, we started to take that and do a couple of things. Number one, we're formalizing what you mentioned earlier as an FAQ. And so I kind of consider this like a greatest hits of the top 10 questions that people are going to ask when we talk about Buddhism and vegetarianism.
Greg, if you could, maybe people in other countries might not know what FAQ is, if you could explain that.
Yeah, I love acronyms. FAQ stands for frequently asked questions. And so it's just that. If somebody starts a conversation kind of anywhere, social media or live, on Buddhism, compassionate eating, veganism, and vegetarian, there's just sort of a set of kind of foundational questions that folks probably will ask or should ask. And many are rooted in what the Buddhist teachings are, and some of them are rooted in misconceptions of what the Buddhist teachings are. So this is really a great resource for people that are either new to the conversation or people who are starting these conversations and looking to answer what sometimes can be some tough questions.
Thanks. Yes, so go ahead. If you're still explaining what you're up to, including this amazing group of frequently asked questions, FAQs.
Yeah, so, we started with what I'll just call sort of a proof of concept. We've spent weeks and weeks collaborating on what these FAQs should be, what the content should be, how we take a really broad approach. And again, we're including Pali Canon and we're including the Mahayana. And we started to take nuggets out of this to start some conversations on Facebook. And it's been amazing, the number of shares, the number of likes, the number of comments. I know Charles has some statistics, but I think we're looking at triple digit increases in engagement just based on proactively asking sort of the online community these same questions and then providing answers based on what we've already kind of documented in this FAQ. So proof of concept says these are things that people want to talk about. We are starting conversations, and we're using this as an opportunity to start to dispel maybe some of those misconceptions.
Great. So it sounds like if I was listening to this for the first time, that we have a lot of really interesting things going. I mean, what could be more important than talking about what the Buddha said and what the Buddha did not say from the text, from the text that Buddhists around the world use. These are some of them are the original teachings. The Pali Canon's the original teachings of the Buddha, etc. Mahayana is, is been used as the centerpiece of so many Mahayana traditions. So this is where we're getting our information, where you're getting your information to compile these FAQs, or frequently asked questions. So what do you think? Anything else there? Let's jump into maybe the questions. Anything else you want to say?
Maybe just one last piece to kind of tease where we're going. The FAQs are really sort of not the end point. It's been sort of building out a foundation. Again, we've a lot of great work in social media. We're going to continue to do that. But as we start to publish the FAQs in the coming weeks, these are now serving as a foundation for the work we're doing on developing online modules. So for folks that really are interested, really want to dig in deeper, really kind of want to hone their skills in being able to start their own conversations and deepen their own understanding, we're going to take this same approach in addressing these top 10 with brief online learning modules that will take folks even deeper into these conversations.
And Greg, if you could just say a little bit about what an online learning module is. I think most people will be familiar with that, but maybe somebody not familiar with it.
Yeah, and I'm going to guess in this world of COVID today, more and more folks are familiar with online learning. And there's a number of websites out there that have been there for years where you can take courses on particular subjects. There's handouts and a course syllabus, just like there would be in a live class. There's video lectures. To some extent, there's Q&A, there's quizzes, there may even be essay assignments. So it's really like a full-blown course just presented online. And what's different about online from taking a standard course is online courses are usually designed to be in kind of short bites. It's not a 6-month course. It might be a 2-week course. It allows folks to fit this in kind of in and around their busy schedule and get things in sort of bite-sized clips. So So it's exciting to be able to offer this, and I think we've got some great content. So certainly more to come. Maybe on my next talk, I'll be able to talk about some of that.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks for that summary. So I hope that some of you out there, hopefully most of you out there, find this interesting. It's good to educate ourselves for sure. It's good to, even if we're committed vegans, committed vegetarians, it's really good to educate ourselves to know that this is the path. This is the path the Buddha taught, but also so that we can ourselves answer questions, as you mentioned, Greg, earlier at the beginning of your speaking. It's really important. People ask us questions. You'll say, well, did the Buddha tell us to be vegetarian? We'll talk about vegan also today, for sure. This is very important. Did the Buddha tell us? What about the teachings? Where does it say this? So what we're doing, and as you mentioned, and I say we, DVA, under the leadership here of Greg, really driving this, we're providing answers to these questions. That's what the frequently asked questions means. They're answers for you to the questions that people will ask you. So we'll answer these questions when we can. When we get these questions, we're screening our films, when we're on social media, like you mentioned. But you're going to get questions from your friends, from your sanghas. And so here's a chance for you. It's going to be laid out. We're putting some of it out here, and we're going to come out with a complete document where you can easily find it. You can easily find the question that you're being asked, and then you'll have the answer right there. So you can become advocates. Everyone out there can become advocates for animals. So this is how we're going to drive our advocacy, being a voice for animals, by having answers to these questions: what the Buddha said and what the Buddha did not say about eating animals. So let's get into what the Buddha said and what the Buddha did not say. So Greg, did the Buddha tell us? The general question is, should Buddhists be vegetarian?
It's a great question. First question on the FAQ, and a question that gets asked just all the time on social media, and then the comments just kind of go nuts from there. And because I mentioned at the outset that we're really being inclusive with this approach, we talk about the Pali Canon, we talk about the Mahayana Canon, sometimes there's a little bit of a different slant or an angle there. So did the Buddha teach vegetarianism? If I look at the Mahayana Canon, and we'll give some examples in a minute, absolutely, unequivocally, there's one sutra, the Lankavatara, where I think he says something like 37 times, don't eat meat, don't eat meat, don't eat meat. In the Pali Canon, we really need to take a more global view. There's a couple of passages, and I know we'll get to these in just a minute, where they may be interpreted to say there's at least some situations where it may be acceptable, at least for monastics. But when we look at the teaching as a whole, not killing, not causing others to kill, cultivating loving kindness, working for the welfare of all beings, it's really tough to kind of align consuming meat and honestly consuming animal products with kind of these fundamental teachings of universal compassion and refraining from killing living beings. So I would say that the short answer is yes, but we'll parse through some of the details here in just a second.
So Greg, you mentioned not killing and not causing others to kill. So could you say a bit about that? Where does that language come from?
Yeah, so it comes from a couple of places, and it's important because kind of one of the arguments or the misconceptions is, well, if I don't kill it, then I didn't do it. There's no negative karma, right? It's kind of get out of jail free card. And that's clearly not what the Buddha taught, and it's not what the Buddha taught in the Pali Canon. And so I'll start with a text that everybody knows. It's called the Dhammapada. And if you want to turn in your hymnals to Dhammapada verse 129, here's what the Buddha says. All tremble at violence, all fear death, seeing others as being like yourself, do not kill or cause others to kill.
Greg, could you please just read that one more time? The first part wasn't so clear on my speaker.
Yeah, absolutely. All tremble at violence, all fear death, seeing others as being like yourself. Do not kill or cause others to kill.
Yeah, thank you. And that's the Dhammapada Pali Canon.
It is, and we can also go a step further. There's another passage in the Nalaka Sutta, which effectively says the same thing. As I am, so are they. As they are, so am I. Having taken oneself as the criterion, one should not kill or cause others to kill. So we could just end the conversation right there. This is the foundation of the Buddha teachings. Meat equals causing to kill, even if we don't kill ourselves. So it seems like it's really cut and dried, and it's a non-controversial answer. Yes, Buddhists should be vegetarian.
And yet there are many Buddhists around the world, as you know, as most of us know, many of us know, who are not vegetarian. So might the message be to them, start where you are. If you connect to the teachings and you want to be really safe and don't want to make a mistake about this, because clearly animals' lives are taken from them when we're eating them. What would be, is there a gradual approach? What do you think would be your advice if you were talking to somebody one-on-one?
Yeah, I think so. You know, for me, I tend to, in almost any question, go back to the Kalama Sutta. You know, the Buddha says, don't just take it because I said it, because it's written down, because it's tradition. Put the practices into place for yourself, examine the results, check what you think you've determined with the opinions of the wise, and then kind of go back to the beginning of that process. And so there's a couple of really key pieces in there. Number one, when the Buddha says, don't take it just because I said it, that assumes that we're familiar with what the Buddha said. So for me, the beginning of the process is just becoming familiar with what the teachings are. And that's part of why we have the FAQ. It's not reasonable to expect that most folks, particularly non-monastics, have sort of the free time to dig through hundreds and hundreds of texts to try to figure this stuff out. So that's why we're really kind of excerpting some of the most relevant passages and bringing them into the FAQ. So number one, what did the Buddha teach? And then how do we assess that? And when we put these things into practice, again, looking at the Dhammapada, looking at the Nalaka, clearly not eating meat means there's no killing, there's no causing to kill. And then when we consult with the wise, if you take a look at the FAQs, it comes out, we've got quotes from people that are really recognized authorities in both the Pali tradition as well as in the Mahayana tradition. So we're providing folks with the opportunity to kind of consult with the wise virtually through this FAQ. So again, to kind of go back to the question, should folks take a gradual approach? That's certainly kind of the way that I came to veganism, and I think that's the way a lot of us do. But I would say the process equally has to be a process of study and self-assessment, and really kind of taking account with how we align our conduct in all areas with the fundamental teachings of the Buddha.
Yeah, no, thanks for that answer. I really appreciate your thoughtfulness. And I myself also, so I've been vegan for almost 20 years now. I was vegetarian for a long time. I wasn't born or raised vegetarian. So we learned this. So if you want to make a shift, or if you're curious about this, you know, please listen and just think about this, engage with it. It's really important. And it's for so many ways. It's clearly important for the animals. Just like us, the animals want to live. They value their lives as much as we do. But start where you are. You know, it's not so helpful to say, oh, I can't do this. It's impossible. I'm no good because I'm not vegetarian. I mean, just start where you are. Do gradually, maybe one meal a day, maybe 1 day a week. Do it for a shorter period of time, and slowly take animals and animal products out of your diet. See if that doesn't work. And it's really the path not only to compassion and non-harming of animals, as you've been saying, Greg, but also it's a path to supporting our environment and not supporting global warming and contributing to global warming, which is what factory farming does. It's #1 in the world, according to the United Nations, et cetera. So yeah, so thank you for that. So it's not here. No one's here to judge anyone on the call or anyone out there who's eating animal flesh at all. You know, I mean, I did when I was younger. You know, I didn't really think about it. I didn't know much about it. So now that you're hearing about it, it's a chance to make a change. And as you make a change, you will influence others for sure. So thank you for, thank you, Greg, for your understanding and explanation of this, but also thanks to everyone out here that's listening to us talk about this. So we offer it in this spirit of compassion and non-judgment. So Greg, another important thing which I wanted to ask you is, was the Buddha talking about animals when he said all beings? And what about that? I mean, human beings, we can reason and think and go on airplanes and all. Are animals included in the Buddha's circle of compassion? Are they included in his admonishment not to harm?
Yeah, great question. That's one that I've been assessing myself here recently. You know, as I think I mentioned, you and I were talking before the call, this has really just been an ongoing journey for me. The more that I dig in, the more that I learn, the more questions that it kind of creates. And this one came up recently because I was looking at two different versions of the Dhammapada. And in Max Muller's translation, the all beings kind of tremble at the rod, all beings tremble at fear death, was translated or rendered as all men fear death. And somehow that didn't resonate with me because I knew from chanting the Metta Sutta at my local Wat Dallas, we talk about all beings. And so I picked up Gil Fronsdal's translation of the Dhammapada, which number one is probably the most gender neutral in terms of its language that I found, but he certainly translates it as all beings. And so I want to know a little bit more of that. So I've got my PDF of the Pali Text Society, Pali to English Dictionary, and I did a little digging. And so you'll forgive my pronunciation in Pali, but what this verse that we're talking about, verse 129 says, is Sabe Tasanti Dandasa, Sabe Bayanti Makuno. All tremble at violence, all fear death. And the key word there is sabe. Sabe is the plural of Saba, S-A-B-B-A, and it's a completely inclusive term. It literally means whole, entire, all, and every. So it's a completely inclusive term. If Max Muller's translation was correct, and what we're talking about is all men or all people, words like Nara, Purisha, Manuja, Pugala, things that mean person, personality, man, would have been the word that was used. And when you start to look through all of these passages that talk about all beings, it's this word sabe that's repeated all and over and over. So it's not do not kill means do not kill people. It means do not kill, full stop.
And yes, in your experience at the International Buddhist College and many, many years of practicing Buddhism as a Buddhist and also engaging with teachers, Asian and Western teachers, that even those that eat meat, do any of the teachers or those that are familiar with the Buddhist teachings, the Pali Canon and Mahayana, do any of them say that animals are not supposed to be or are not to be included in our circle of compassion or circle of non-harming?
Yeah, that's certainly not been the case. Generally, the conversation is more around some of the exceptions that we'll talk about in a minute. Well, but this and this and that. And I think really what it comes from asking some of these questions is twofold. One, it's not really digging into this. We think about Buddhism, we think about meditation, and we think about emptiness and all these philosophical teachings. And it doesn't feel like for the majority of folks that I talk with that are not vegans or vegetarians, that this has really been an area where folks have explored it. And trying to understand, one, why that's the case is there's some personal accounting that happens when we confront this stuff. And then number two, it's certainly controversial. I've had folks, monastics, refuse to allow me to post questions and statements on veganism and vegetarianism in Buddhist discussion groups because it's controversial. And I've talked to monastics and asked about how they educate the folks that come to their Dhamma talks on the subject. And it's not something that's generally discussed. Well, people aren't really into that. And from my perspective, number one, because it's controversial, that's absolutely the reason that we should be talking about it. That's really the interesting stuff. And then number two, as you mentioned, because the stakes are so high, I think it's worth kind of taking account, really looking in the mirror and saying, not only is this in line with the teachings, is it even necessary?
Yeah. So to your point, Greg, it's said that between 10 and 20,000, between 10,000 and 20,000 animals are killed to feed a person in the United States. So this may be less in other places, probably not in China. You eat a lot of animal flesh, but it's even in countries that don't eat so many animals, it's still huge. Thousands of animals die. So this obviously is really important. And it's just one person consumes 10 to 20,000 animals in the U.S. But as to I can answer my own question, my own experience, which is, no practicing Buddhist, no monastic, no layperson in 20 years. I was an advocate for animals in Buddhist communities for 10 years before we started DVA. Not a single person who has any familiarity with the Buddhist teachings has said compassion and non-harming doesn't apply to animals. They say you can't harm an animal, so you can't kill a pig, but those that are eating animals say, well, I'm not killing the pig. So we've been talking about that. So no one who's familiar, who practices Buddhism says that the compassion and non-harming teachings of the Buddha shouldn't be applied to animals. Everyone assumes that. And then we get separated on these other issues, whether it's okay to let someone else kill. So let me ask you about this. What about that? What about a lot of Buddhists that I talk to, a lot of people who practice the Dharma, however people self-identify isn't important. If you're following the Buddhist teachings, I'm talking about you and about this. A lot of people will say, well, I'm not the one that actually killed the animal. And so I'm okay. I'm not violating the first precept, not violating the Buddhist teachings on compassion, karuna. What about that?
So my long answer would be kind of like the earlier one. Let's go back and take a look at the teachings. In my experience, folks haven't done a lot of self-searching and examining how the actions that they're taking really line up with teachings of not causing others to kill and working for the welfare of all beings, which are concepts that I think we're all fairly familiar with. But on the other side, if we just take it from a practical standpoint, Buddhism is all about cause and effect, right? There's this chain of causation that is inherent in consuming meat. And I think Shabkar said, right, if there's no meat eaters, there's no killers. So it's clearly a cause and effect. And perhaps even worse, because we're not doing the killing, there's this whole, what I'll just call from an American business standpoint, there's this whole supply chain that's involved, from the organizations that are responsible for raising and killing the animals, to all of the folks that are transporting these animals, to the folks and the retailers and the groceries that are buying this animal flesh, putting the animal flesh on the counter, the kid at the checkout that's ringing this animal flesh up. When you think about the thousands of folks that are involved in the supply chain, to me, it's even worse. You're not killing, you're causing to kill, and you're causing countless individuals to be involved in what, you and I talk about over and over, is a prohibited trade, right? This is absolutely kind of flying in the face of the idea of wrong livelihood. If it was okay to have others kill for you, there would be no prohibition against being a butcher, trading in flesh, and so on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so let me say a few words about that. I really appreciate what you just said, because now we should talk about others in the supply chain. You brought it up. So I'm thinking, what about slaughterhouse workers? So here, people, because we eat, and we being Buddhists in the world, so there's anywhere from 750 million to 1 billion Buddhists, depending on how you count in China. Well, someone has to kill the animal for a Buddhist to eat the animal, and those people work in the slaughterhouses. So are we saying when we're eating animal flesh that it's okay for slaughterhouse workers to violate the precepts of the Buddha and to subject these animals to torture and cruelty and terrible terror that they experience? And someone is going to accrue or incur this negative karma. And how unfair in the United States, I'm not sure about other countries, it's the absolute most dangerous, lowest paid, worst occupation in the United States. It's incredibly dangerous. These hooks come around. People are injured all the time. The President of the United States ordered the slaughterhouse workers to stay working during this pandemic, and tens of thousands of them caught coronavirus, changing their lives forever. So we subject people to this when we're eating animal flesh. It's not only our karma, but really looking at all beings, which is the teaching of the Buddha, to devote our practice to the happiness, benefit, and awakening of all beings. It seems quite unfair. And people working there are in the United States, usually people of color, minorities, and they are often immigrants that have very little choice on what job they're trying to feed their family. So we're eating the animals, someone's killing that animal. So anyway, you and I talked about that. Yeah. What about wise livelihood? You want me to say something about that, or do you want to say something about that?
Yeah, I think so. Just because, again, that doesn't seem like one that, in general, as Buddhists, we spend an awful lot of time on. And I'm not sure how familiar folks are with that. So I think that's worth at least a little bit of a conversation.
Yes, so wise livelihood, or right livelihood is sometimes called. Right livelihood or wise livelihood is one segment, one component of the Noble Eightfold Path, the fourth noble truth. So what about this? The Buddha did not define what unwise or wrong livelihood was. He didn't define what right livelihood was. He defined what not right livelihood was. And he did this by picking out 4 occupations. 2 of them relate directly to animals. He said that one should not slaughter animals. So now we're talking about the slaughterhouse workers, these poor folks that have very, very little choices and are forced to work in the U.S. during the coronavirus shutdown and pandemic. And we talked about that. So the Buddha's admonition was, don't engage in slaughtering animals. And he also said, and maybe this is even more important than the slaughtering prohibition by the Buddha. He said, do not engage in raising animals for slaughter. This is the second of 4 prohibitions in right livelihood. Do not engage, do not raise animals for slaughter. So what could this mean? So certainly this takes us to a place, the Buddha took us to a place beyond just cutting the throat of the animal or slaughtering an animal in another way. He's now saying don't raise the animals for slaughter, even if they're slaughtered by others. And there's usually a division, at least in the Western countries, between the raising of animals and the slaughtering of animals. So if he's saying not to raise animals for slaughter, he's saying I'm not drawing the line between at killing the animal or not killing it, but instead I'm drawing the line between being involved in the process, to your point before, in the process of killing animals and not being involved in that process. And look how many people, to your point, Greg, are involved in the process of slaughtering animals when we're eating those animals, those that are raising them, those that are slaughtering, those that are driving the trucks, and on and on and on. And so it seems unfair to me as a Buddhist to subject those people, apart from the harm to the animals directly, which is enormous and unfathomable, how unfair it is to subject these folks that are trying to earn a living to negative karma and to violating the precept, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
100% agree.
So why don't we move this? We could talk about this all day, but we're not going to. So let's move on then to a second question. Did the Buddha allow his followers to eat meat? Did the Buddha allow his followers to eat meat?
Yeah, so here's another controversial answer I'm going to give that shouldn't be controversial if we look at the text. The answer is yes, and the answer is also no. And again, if we look at the Pali Canon, we look at the Mahayana Canon, on the surface, we could say that there's different answers, but we look at this, it's really more of a matter of a progressive teaching. And so this is one, even folks that don't know a lot about what the suttas and the sutras say about eating meat and not eating meat, everybody seems to know. It's the Jivaka Sutta. And the Buddha presents what I will call an exception rather than a rule. And I know you and I have talked about this. And the Buddha's accused of eating meat that was specifically killed for him. And so this is what he says in response. He says, I say there are 3 instances in which meat should not be eaten: when it is seen, heard, or suspected that the living being has been slaughtered for oneself. I say there are 3 instances in which meat may be eaten: when it's not seen, not heard, and not suspected that the living being has been slaughtered for oneself.
So,
I say that meat may be eaten. Go ahead.
there's a lot of words, sorry to interrupt. There's a lot of words there. And so if someone's hearing this for the first time, their eyes could get glazed over, like, what are they talking about? So I know if you could help us understand this in the simplest of terms. It's not simple.
Yeah.
It's not easy to do.
Absolutely. So let me give the summary. And if you've got it at home, you want to look it up online, Majjhima Nikaya, Sutta number 55, the Jivaka Sutta. And the Buddha basically says there's 3 occasions where monks can eat meat, and these occasions are, and I'll give the full version that you'll find in the in the Nikaya. He says it's allowed when it is not seen, not heard, and not suspected that the living being was killed for you directly. And so this is sort of that foundational teaching that a lot of folks that eat meat will say, well, this is my get out of jail free card. And so I got a couple of responses to that. Number one, we need to consider context. The Buddha is saying that to his monks, they may eat meat in these 3 conditions. Why? Because they're dependent on alms. They're eating kind of what they're given. Number 2, we're clearly not monastic, so that's probably not the case for at least the most of us that are not ordained followers, or we're not dependent on alms. But if we look forward, and I'm going to step into the Mahayana canon, in the Mahaparinirvana Sutra, not to be confused with the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, in the sutra, the Buddha says these 3 kinds of pure meat were so instituted following the need of the occasion. And what he kind of follows on to say was, at this time, I said that this was an exception that I would allow. Today, I'm saying that it is no longer an exception that I allow. And this is really sort of a step-by-step teaching. As Bob, you mentioned earlier, kind of taking this as stages and making it a gradual process. So on one hand, we have, hey, there's some exceptions. On the other hand, there were exceptions where, we're big men and women now, we've been around for a while. We understand that we need to progress to this next level, which is abandoning this.
So let me see if I understand. The Buddha in the Jivaka Sutta, it's Majjhima Nikaya number 55, middle length discourses. It's a Pali Canon, the original teachings of the Buddha. The Buddha speaking to the rule for monks on alms rounds, monks that are going out begging, monks and nuns, monastics, on alms rounds, going out begging for food. He said, well, if you know something to be meat or animal flesh that's been put in your bowl, you can eat it, but only under a very limited exception. That limited exception is that you see or hear the animal's been killed for you. And most importantly, for our purposes here, if you even suspect, well, in English, now this may be a little difficult for people who are not speaking English as a first language, as a second or third language. So the word suspect is really important here. It means just to have a hunch, a mere hunch. It's possible that. If it's possible that the animal has been killed for you, under even the Buddha's small exception, monks and nuns on alms rounds can't eat that food. And what's the reason for that? How could it be anything, Greg, other than the Buddha is trying to preserve life? He's practicing his own teachings that no additional sentient being should die at the hands of the monks, at the hands of his followers.
Yeah, and I'd even take it a step further. So if that's the case, you would think that those of us who are versed in the Dhamma and seek to share the Dhamma with others would, in light of this, be educating folks on what it says in the Dhammapada, what it says in the Nalaka Sutta, what working for the well-being of all beings means, what wrong livelihood means, so that we're actually creating the causes and conditions where there's no way, shape, or form that this could even happen. Aside from the indirect argument about because we eat it, somebody puts it on a shelf and somebody behind the chain has to kill it, the simple fact that we have the opportunity to draw the conclusion between there's this exception for monks and the fact that we don't have to put monks in that situation by even offering in this first place, I think is sometimes a miss in the conversation.
Yeah, no, good point. I really appreciate that. So now what about a layperson? Person identifies as Buddhist, or sometimes in the West they say, oh, I'm a Dharma practitioner, whatever identification is. People that follow the teachings, want to follow the teachings of the Buddha, they go into the store to buy a chicken breast, or they go out to a restaurant to buy a turkey sandwich. Can they find a protection or justification in the Jivaka Sutta?
So my short answer would be no. This is a discourse given to monastics, and it's about an exception. You know, if we take a look at the Vinaya, right? If we take a look at the rules and regulations for ordained followers, monks and nuns, these are the things you can do. These are the things you can't do. And if you can't do them and you do them, you have to confess. There's different levels of punishment, up to and including just being kicked out of the order altogether. So all of these things that we find in the Vinaya are something happened. The Buddha talked about that thing and said, based on the teachings and the directions that we're going, here's what you can and can't do. If you look at the rules in the Vinaya, there's always sort of the prohibition, and then there's the exception, so that it's really, really clear when you can do something and when you can do something without incurring a punishment. And usually it has to do with volition, intention. Because if we read this passage and say, as a monk, I'm unintentionally eating this, hey, there's no penalty. But as a layperson, it's not even the same conversation, right? I'm going and picking up a pack of hamburgers to put on the grill. There's nothing unintentional about that. Now, you could say that in the Pali Canon, at least, the Buddha doesn't expressly provide a teaching for lay practitioners one way or the other. And my response would be, it's not actually necessary. It's clearly implicit in all of the teachings about working for the welfare of all beings, not killing and causing to kill. The two are just antithetical. You can't eat meat on one hand and assume that you're working for the well-being of all on the other hand. They just don't align at all. So I don't think that there's any justification in the Pali Canon. And this exception, not rule, but exception for the monastics, just simply doesn't apply.
Yeah, thanks. That was very, very clear. I really appreciate that. So the animal, obviously, a chicken, a turkey, a pig, a fish, doesn't want to be eaten. So if we look at the Buddhist teachings on compassion for all beings and how bodhisattvas' path are to work for the awakening and the enlightenment of all beings, it's pretty hard to say, I'm going to eat this being, but send them metta. The chicken doesn't want our metta. The chicken wants not to be eaten by Buddhists. So I think we've covered this well. I want to spend a little time. We have just a little time remaining on the next question. Why is vegetarianism not enough? Why should Buddhists be vegan?
Yeah, that really is sort of the question that follows. And I think my first answer was, should Buddhists be vegetarian? I think I said at a minimum. And we look at, on the whole, at the teachings around compassion, the well-beings of all, and not killing and not causing to kill. Clearly, that's what I'll call a minimum standard. But when we take a look at what's involved in the dairy industry, we take a look at what's involved in the production of eggs, veganism is really the logical choice. It's the most compatible with the Dhamma and living out sort of these precepts and these values. I'll certainly point folks to Nick Rebush's article on the DVA website, which I think is fantastic. And I think I put the link here in the chat. And it talks about, when veganism isn't enough. But for folks who aren't familiar, I'll just maybe point out a couple of examples. If we talk about not killing, we talk about not causing to kill, and we talk about happy beings, the idea that number one, we're forcibly confining cows and chickens. Clearly, these are not animals looking after themselves with ease. These are not beings that are happy. We look at the conditions that those animals are being kept in even further. And then we talk about not killing and not causing to kill. The simple act of raising cows for dairy requires killing. Female provide milk. Males do not. Those males become veal and are shortly thereafter killed after being kept in horrible conditions. So causing to kill is inherent in the production of dairy. And it's the same thing when we get to eggs. Chicks are sorted shortly after their birth. Female chicks go down one path and become egg-laying hens. Male chicks go down another path, often ending up in what's called a screw, which is effectively a meat grinder. So there's no harmlessness in drinking a glass of milk. There's no harmlessness in eating an egg. There's really no difference between between consuming dairy and consuming eggs and being involved in this causal chain that requires killing and causing to kill.
Yeah. No, thanks. That was also very clear to me. I hope to our listeners as well. I'm sure to our listeners as well. And I just want to repeat but elaborate just a little bit on a point I made before and see what you think of this, Greg. Start where you are. If it's, as I mentioned, I was vegetarian for a long time before I became vegan. It wasn't like what you just said, it wasn't that was not available. But it's like, it just didn't really want to hear it. I wasn't thinking I didn't want to hear it, but I didn't really want to hear it because I enjoyed egg in the morning and cheese and other products from animals. It wasn't really until I was put in a situation where I had to look directly at that I changed. So wherever you are, if you're listening to us, if you're vegan, great. If you're vegetarian, great. You got just a little bit more work to do, and thank you for saving 95% of the animals. If you're none of the above, start somewhere. If you're not vegan or vegetarian, and it's not only for all the reasons that Greg has been sharing with us today, it's not only from the point of view of the animals, that certainly would be enough. When we're talking 10 to 20,000 are killed to feed Americans on an average in a lifetime of an American, but all over the world this is happening. All over the world, Buddhists are eating animals and eating animal products. But start wherever you are, and just try changing a little bit. If you go to a restaurant or you go to someone else's home that you discuss this with, so try vegetarian. If you go out to a restaurant, go to a vegetarian, better yet a vegan restaurant, and just start that. When someone comes over, maybe make a special meal and leave animals and animal products out and just see what that's like and how much better you feel. This is a practice not only of non-harming and compassion, it's also a practice of dana, of generosity. We have the ability and the capacity to take animals' lives away from them and to contribute substantially to their suffering. We also have the capacity to not do that. So instead of focusing on all of the times that you are eating animals or animal products, start one day, one meal, 1 week at a time, giving dana to the animals, because this is the practice of the Buddha, the practice of the Buddha of generosity. We don't have to eat these guys. We don't have to eat their products. We don't have to eat we don't have to cause the death of their children. We could take another path. And as you put it, Greg, beautifully, if you look at the entire teachings of the Buddha, the entire Dhamma or Dharma, it's so clear that protect all life, stand, and not only the ones we can see, and not only humans, but the ones we can't see, the ones who don't have a voice. I want to see if there's any questions. Ask Charles if we have anything pending that he'd like to share with us. I'm looking at the, by the way, if anyone has any questions or comments, please, on the chat room, if you're on our webinar, please put that out there. I'm looking now. I've asked you a couple questions that came to my attention. And so, Greg, let me ask you, probably maybe go another 5 minutes for those that are listening patiently. And I want to talk for a couple of minutes at the end. Is there anything you'd like to add to what you've said or what we've said?
Yeah, so I think number one, I appreciate people's patience. This is a lot of material. We've done our best to do kind of the research for you and bring all this stuff together. And what you'll find when you review the FAQs is even more information, as well as links to where you can go and look at the original sources yourself, which I think is helpful. And I think the other piece, is I think, Bob, both you and I have mentioned, this is not about judgment. This is around providing information, access to information, so folks can learn for themselves and make the right decision. And I also want to be clear that some level of advocacy on this subject is absolutely what the Buddha calls us to do. And I don't think that's widely known. I think some folks will maybe take an approach, hey, I'm going to make the right decision, but I can't really tell other people what to do. And specifically on this subject, the Buddha exhorts us to do just this. There's a passage in the Samyutta Nikaya where he says, he himself abstains from the destruction of life, exhorts others to abstain from the destruction of life, and speaks in praise of abstinence from the destruction of life. And so I'd like to think that that's really in line with kind of what DVA's mission is, what we're trying to do here in the FAQs, what we're trying to do in starting these conversations is speak in praise of the destruction of life and really bring this teaching to life.
Yeah, thank you, Greg. So this was a pleasure. We've had, as you said, many conversations over the last 3 years about this. And we finally had a chance to have our conversation in public and hopefully heard by a bunch of people. So I really appreciate it. Hopefully we'll have you back soon. And I want to thank you for amazing work that you've been doing for the last 3 years. And so finally, to acknowledge you, thank you very much, Greg Schmidt. Really appreciate you. And I hope this was helpful to everyone. I just want to conclude then, take a couple more minutes. First of all, I want to say hi to Shanika, who's our National Events Supervisor in Sri Lanka, who's on our webinar and just made a presentation earlier today. It's kind of late now on Sunday night, but earlier Sunday in the Colombo, Sri Lanka area to about 75 Buddhist followers on why we should not be eating animals, etc. So we're doing this all around Sri Lanka. I also want to thank Simon up in the Bay Area, a longtime supporter of DVA, and sent a comment here in the chat room. Hi, Simon. Hope to talk to you again sometime soon. Thank you for all your support over the years. And all of you, those that I'm not mentioning because I don't know you're on the call. Thanks for joining us. So I want to just conclude by thanking all of you for showing up, listening to us, for all of your support in different ways. We've got so many volunteers that are helping us out in the US, in Europe, and in Asia. And also for those that have supported us with their hard-earned dollars or bahts in Thailand or rupees in Sri Lanka. So, we're a nonprofit organization, which means we can't sell services, we can't sell goods. We have to rely on the generosity, or as the Buddha put it, the dana of our supporters, of our members, of people that want to support our message. And, this has been a really tough year with the pandemic. I think it's been difficult for nonprofits and NGOs around the entire world. We have an exciting match. A U.S. donor has agreed and is matching dollar for dollar, rupee for rupee, euro for euro, every donation. So, in order to have these projects, we pay our staff in Sri Lanka, we pay our staff in Thailand, we pay our staff in Vietnam, we pay our staff in the United States. I mean, we have a lot of bills to pay, and we really need your support to do this. Dana, generosity, I mentioned that before, is one of the 10 paramis in Theravadan Buddhism. And we very much welcome your support. And you can go to our website. We have a donate page. You can donate on Facebook and pretty much everywhere. So we really appreciate it in advance. I know it's a difficult time for a lot of people. A lot of people are out of work. So please take care of yourself, everyone. Stay safe and healthy. And we'll be back in 2 weeks from yesterday with Tanisara. Greg, go ahead.
I have one question come in late on the chat that I'd love to talk about. I know I've got some idea. I think you've got some plans here. The question is, how does DVA spread the message covered this morning? And are the tactics entirely outreach based, or are there any opportunities to incorporate direct action to encourage change in the global Buddhist communities? And that was from James. It's a great question.
Yeah, hey, Greg, thanks for bringing James's question to my attention. So, James, if you can hear us, hopefully you can. Thank you for the question. So I mentioned this at the beginning. What are the ways of that we spread the word? So there's a lot of different ways. One is our new speakers program. We talk about it. But most important is direct engagement with Buddhist communities. So first I'll talk, I don't know if you're from the US or live in another country, but in the US, we try to do this with Buddhist centers and even some Buddhist sanghas, the larger ones. And that is, we try to start conversations when we know people, either a manager of a retreat, the major cook of in a kitchen at a retreat center or a temple or a monastery. Perhaps it's the abbot or the head monk of a monastery. We want to engage in conversation. We try to do this without judgment. It's not like that we're better than anybody. This is our path and we're up there. What would animals say if we could bring animals into the room? We know that people that are kind of on the short end of the stick, we say, people who are treated not so well, intentionally or unintentionally by communities, they can come in. It's possible for them to come in and have their voice be heard. It's impossible for animals to do that. Obviously, they don't speak our language. They did not pick DVA to be their spokespeople. They didn't pick us to be their voice, but no one else was doing it. So we did it. In places like Sri Lanka, we're talking to the Buddhist children at the Dhamma schools, the Sunday schools. This is a real curriculum. They have, and Shanika, who is still on our call, she graduated from this. You start out when you're 5 or 6 and graduate when you're, I think, 15 or 16. They have curriculum. They have examinations. It's not like the Sunday schools that I went to in the U.S. These are like real schools where the teachings are taken seriously. We've given hundreds of presentations at Dhamma schools around the country. So this is the way we do it. In Thailand, we're talking, Banks is our director out there. He's getting his PhD in public health in the next few months. He's a vegan and he's a former monk himself. And he's giving talks, presentations directly to the monks at the largest temples or wats in Thailand. That's how we're trying to change the habits and encouraging more compassionate diets on the part of the monastics, which will then filter down to the 65 million followers in the country. So this is how we're doing. I hope I answered your question. This is what we talk about, and this is what we try to do all the time. And so what you could do to help is you could send us an email, and we have a form for that, to be a volunteer. Or you can support us with your hard-earned money. You can just come on these calls, and you can be a voice for animals yourself. We are finished. I again want to thank Greg so much. We're going to try to have you. We will have you back for sure. Just thank you so much for all your work behind the scenes and today. So thanks, and thanks to all
Absolutely.
of you for joining us. Here, everyone. See you, I hope, a week from Saturday with Tanisara. You're going to want to listen to her. She's amazing. Thanks a lot. Good morning or good night.
See ya.